This is the Griffin Realty Group Ask-A-Griffin podcast, episode number 35, as we start our section on financing. Is a financial prequalification process beneficial to the buyer? Are you a home seller or buyer who has questions about selling or buying residential property, but you can't find an easy way to get the answers? Well, then, hey, you are definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of the Griffin Realty Group and the host of the Ask-A-Griffin podcast. Now, to help you take immediate action, to get started in the right direction, if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the very near future, you can take advantage of our free step-by-step guides that are waiting for you over at griffincourses.com. That's griffincourses.com. All right, let's get started. In this episode, we start a new section of our buyer plan where we talk about financing. And the question on the table to begin this is financial prequalification process, being part of the buying process. Is that important? Is it beneficial? Well, the answer is, of course. It's a rhetorical question because it's extremely important, but most buyers don't really think about it. Why? When you start the buying process, it's typically emotional. Not for everybody, of course, but if it's your home, you're thinking about where can I be? Some of you are pragmatic and practical. I understand that. It might be less emotional, but don't kid yourselves. Buying home triggers different senses, even if you are a practical business person. And so when that happens, you have to understand that there is a process. This is not an event. You don't just go out and all of a sudden buy a house. I mean, you can, and you think that's all there is to it, but you're actually walking through a lot of steps, even if it's happening quickly. So if we slow it down for you, and we talk about representation, we always recommend that you have some guidance and representation on the buy side. I know a lot of you think with the advent of all these apps and the internet that it's just this easy thing. You just go pick it, you just show up, and it's easy. Well, again, I'm not saying that you can't do it that way, and it happens a lot. But I am recommending that there's a best practices way, and that when somebody's representing you, the first thing that they should be telling you is get pre-qualified. It's a really important process when somebody's representing you to go through this correctly. There are steps. And what is the real hurry? Even if you have to move quickly, it's a very short process to get with a lender and to go through a pre-qualification. It's pre-approval and pre-qualification can be confusing terms, but pre-qualifying is saying, do I qualify for a loan? So it hits more of the basics of the starting point of the process. So you're looking at, really quickly, the most important thing is your credit history. What is your credit score? And that's why you want to always pay attention to your credit score, especially well in advance of you trying to get a loan, because you might want to pay down some credit cards to less than 50% of the full credit balance. The little tips like that. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but there are things that you need to know about. Because even if you're doing financially well, you still would like to know the cost of money. What does it really look like? What's the total cost of borrowing money if you're going for a loan? So the idea of getting that all in place is important, and it also gives you a sense of control. In my experience, which is vast and long and many thousands of hours of dealing with buyers, is that there's this anxiety. By the way, it's on the sell side too, and I'll touch upon that in this podcast episode, that the seller is going to be anxious when you show up. So you're going to see how that relates to it's best to be pre-qualified before we get to them. But let's just suffice to say for you gain a sense of control. Because you're dealing with the logical and not the emotional. The emotional is, what neighborhood is this? What's the building like? What's the neighborhood like as far as its location? Am I close to things? Can I drive? Can I walk? You get very emotionally involved. And again, my example here is when it's home. It's also, for you investors out there who might be listening to this too, it is also important for you to understand that somebody's going to rent it from you. So all of those emotional attributes apply to the renter. So whomever it is, when you're buying, you're getting emotionally involved in the where it is and what it's all about and how it lives, the lifestyle. Let's just sum it up that way. And then there's this logical money side of things. And that's the next point here. Pre-qualification actually helps the buyer match the money to the features that it can buy. So let's go back. Here we are all emotional about lifestyle and is this going to serve us? Is if we have kids, is the school system right? All of these variables that you're all dealing with make you emotional because it becomes overwhelming. Here you have your day job or all the other things that you're doing in your life, and now you have to go get all these variables involved in buying a house. So of course you're going to feel the emotion rising and the anxiety rises with that emotion. So pre-qualification brings back some of the logic. And when we have some logic and some math that's basic, we gain a sense of what? Control. Over what? Those emotions. Because one of the underlying and maybe more subconscious issue causing anxiety is, how much is this going to cost me? Even if you're well-heeled, even if you have a lot of money, you didn't get a lot of money most likely because you were haphazard, or at least even if you inherited it, you didn't throw it away because you weren't haphazard. So being organized financially, it gives you that sense of control. So you know before you go shopping. If you go shopping for a home without this in place, you could make a financial mistake. I mean, it might not be a devastating one, presuming you want to be in that home for a long period of time, but why not get this right? This just doesn't take that long. Literally, the buyer agent will have most of the time, and hopefully all of the time for you buyer agents out there, you would have a go-to person that you could send them to as a mortgage broker, a lender at a bank, whomever you're doing business with, just to go through this pre-qualification process, which takes a look at the basics, like I said, what their credit score is, what their employment history is, what their income levels are. And this is before pulling tax returns, etc., which will happen next. So all of that's happening so that you're matching the money to the features that that money buys, right? Let that sink in for a second, that you are matching the money that you pre-qualify to spend to what that money bought. And again, I'm going back to representation. When we at the Griffin Realty Group, we represent buyers, we want them to get pre-qualified first, so that when we show them the sold properties at what they're looking to spend and they've pre-qualified for. Now remember, if it's a loan, you're pre-qualifying for a program that you have to put some of your own money down. For first-time home buyers, it could be as little as 3.5%, including some of that being a gift. And then for most people, it's somewhere between as low as 5% and mostly 20%. I mean, a real solid bank is going to probably require you to come up with 20% if they're lending their own money. That's how they avoid the risk. So that loan plus what you put down is the range within which you'd like to spend. So rather than go out and shop and look at everything that is for sale, a good buyer representative is going to slow you down and say, let's look at what it just bought. So as you're jumping onto the train now pre-qualified or getting pre-qualified and beginning to understand what you want to spend and can spend, you look backwards in time and you say, well, what did that kind of money buy in that neighborhood? So again, geographically, we're starting at the outer ring of the bullseye. Well, I'd love to live in Beacon Hill in Boston. Well, all of a sudden that gets very geographically small. So now I look at that and I say, okay, in the last 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, show me what this kind of money bought. Now I'm looking at pictures and details out of the multiple listing service. By the way, the only true source of the real information is the multiple listing service. That's where it's all kept. So you can look at myriad details and pictures of properties that it bought. And you'd ask yourself, would I have bought any of those with the money that I'm ready to spend? Because if the answer is no, and for example, Beacon Hill is too expensive, and you can't then go in there and buy what you want, well, now you say, well, how close can I get to that lifestyle and afford to be there? Again, I'm not making any judgment whether you have a lot of money, have a little bit of money. I'm just talking about this process and how it works. Let's presume somebody is very wealthy, but the mortgage rates are so low that they don't want to take cash to buy the property. They want to go through this pre-qualification process just to see what the cost of money really looks like as it relates to buying the house, so that they know exactly what they're comfortable putting down and borrowing, so that they have their math in place. And it's the same thing. Once you put that together, you now can go back and look at that, of the highest end properties. What did it buy? And is that satisfactory? Let me throw in here also for you cash buyers. Well, I don't need to listen to this podcast because I've got the cash. And you flex your muscles and you say, I'm so wealthy, I've got the cash. Well, I appreciate that. That's wonderful. Good for you that you're in that kind of a position. But you want to sit down and make a decision, whether it's with your financial advisor in that case, your banker, your investment banker, wherever your money's being kept, and saying, if you don't have it in liquid cash, which you want to get that ready, by the way. So your pre-qualification is you look at your own portfolio and what are you going to take from your portfolio and put it into this hard asset in real estate. And again, emotionally, it's best to think about that ahead of time so you control yourself, right? You put a cap on what you really want to spend and you go from there. And of course, be careful of that because you go there and you see what the money buys. You don't like it, you go up. That's great. You can do that too. So you're pre-qualifying yourself against your own cash, and then you're getting liquid so that you can close quickly, because you're going to see how this comes in this last point here. So now we have the buyer who knows what they're going to spend. They know what that buys. Now they can begin the shopping. And by the way, a good representative is going to tell you, see, this is what somebody really bought, but I want you to understand, for example, this market is slow. So most of the final asking price was somewhere above this by about 6%, 3%, or the market's so hot that I want you to know that this sold price here, the asking price was below it, and this was 102% of the asking price. That becomes significant math so that you're matching what you can spend to the reality of the marketplace. Let's say you can spend $1 million on a property, and that's all you're going to spend, not a nickel more. You can't go further. Well, don't presume that you could go into a hot market looking at $1 million thinking you're going to get it at $1 million or less if it's white hot and everything's going for another $20,000 above that. It's really $1.2 million at $1 million ask because it's being bid up. So that's how the marketplace math relates to what you're about to spend. See where I'm going with this podcast? There's a lot to the value of pre-qualification. It sets everything up correctly. Now, here's the third point, final point for this podcast. Pre-qualification also helps the buyer prove financial capability for the seller. Let's take the case of a hot marketplace. There are a lot of bids happening in a hot marketplace in a short period of time. And if it's white hot, especially if you're a first-time home buyer, you might have a line down the street. So I can tell you right away, as a veteran listing agent and buyer agent, just a veteran agent of 21 years of doing this, that I go through this process that I'm talking about in this podcast with my buyers. All the Griffin Realty Group agents, the same thing. All of the Realty Classroom coaching members, their teams. Everybody is taught to be properly prepared because the buyer is judging you on the level of representation, the professionalism of that representation. Because in a hot market, if you don't do all this and you haphazardly go out there and then you're scratching your head and saying, well, why did the buyer leave me? Why did they quote unquote cheat on me? Why did they go to another buyer? Because you didn't do this kind of stuff. You didn't give them the best chance to win with the seller. You took them in without a pre-qualification, for example. I don't know who you are, so I don't know who I'm talking to. But you took them into competitive situation, and they were just barely getting in the pre-qualification process. Now, again, all you representatives, that's not your fault. If somebody just comes to you out of the middle of, nowhere, and they're in a rush, and no matter how much you tell them slow down, they don't. I get that situation. But if you bring a buyer into this dogfight, per se, where there are all sorts of bids and you don't have a pre-qualification and there's not a lender sitting at the other end of the phone ready to be questioned by the listing agent or the seller directly, right? I want to take this property off the market and accept your offer, but I want to talk to your lender first. See, if that's not all set up and ready to go, thanks for the letter, and you put the name of the lender on it, and you say that when you present that as an offer, hey, look, feel free to call them. They're well-heeled. They're deep into the pre-qualification process. In fact, they're really pre-approved personally. The property just needs to be part of the final pre-approval, right? And by the way, that's the way true pre-approval works. Nobody's really qualified completely for a mortgage loan and gets a mortgage commitment letter until the property has been analyzed by the bank too. So the whole process doesn't really end until a formal commitment has been given, right? So there's more to this, but this pre-qualification process, you can take it really, really far with the human being. Then the property enters the picture once things go under. But again, for the seller, and I'm really going to hit you with the cash buyer or somebody has a lot of cash down. The seller doesn't care about anything other than that you have the wherewithal to close the deal. If you give a seller the right offer as far as the money is concerned and your terms and conditions are fair, they just want to know before they take it off the market that you are really serious about this, that your pre-qualification is deep and serious. And if the other agent is a good agent, they will pick up the phone and they will ask questions for the seller. Okay? So that's why pre-qualification matters. Now, to the cash buyers, a footnote. When I said go get pre-qualified with your financial advisor and your banker, I meant it for a very particular tactical reason when it comes to you negotiating. Most likely, when you have cash, you think because you're not going to have a mortgage contingency that you can and should get a discount. Maybe not all the time if you just know it's competitive and you know you have to be where you have to be. But let's presume that your perception is that cash allows you to be a more certain bet. That's fine. But don't get your hubris on and get all flustered if somebody asks you for proof of funds. Because a smart listing agent is going to do that. Because anybody can say, I don't need a mortgage contingency. I've seen many bait and switches where somebody said there's no mortgage contingency. Then now the deal's tied up. The next thing you know, they're asking for access for an appraiser. And that appraiser is coming in obviously on behalf of the bank, unless there's just another reason for it, but usually not. So they're coming in for the bank. So hoodwinked, right? You are putting a mortgage on it. But you're going to lose your deposit if you mess around here and don't get pre-approved because you put it in there and you took us off the market. So a lot of those things can happen. So you have to understand the anxiety of the sell side. So don't get your hubris on, like I said, about, well, I've got plenty of money. Just get a pre-qualification letter. By the way, you don't have to show bank statements. I don't know why representatives are always showing bank statements and, zeroing out numbers. It starts with just a simple letter from the institution where you have the cash and the liquid assets, where when they're on demand with a blank letter ready to go that can be presented with your property offer. So let's say you make an offer of $1.5 million, $1.5 million on a property. You or the broker calls the institution where the banker is and says, look, could you just fill in the blank that they have the wherewithal to complete the transaction at $1.5 million. That's a pre-qualification of a cash wherewithal, right? That you have the capability. Comes over, manager's name's at the bottom, listing agent picks up the phone and said, can they complete the transaction in cash at $1.5 million in the next 30 days? Yes, they can. That's all there is to it. Because it's just about whether you're pre-qualified to pay cash or pre-qualified with a loan, the seller wants to know. All right, so let me go back over those. The real question on the table is rarely rhetorical. Is a financial pre-qualification process beneficial? Of course it is. And the number one point here was the best buyer agency representation practices always include having you go through financial pre-qualification. So find a good buyer agent who is talking about that and coordinating that, right? Next, pre-qualification helps the buyer match the money and the features, meaning once you're really starting to pre-qualify, you can take a look back into the multiple listing service with your buyer agent saying, what did this money just buy and would I buy it or do I need to make search adjustments before I even start? And lastly, pre-qualification helps the buyer prove financial capability for the seller. And that's really important. Be courteous to the seller. They're anxious too. They're about to take their property off the market, trusting that you have the financial capability. And for all you cash buyers, they can't read your mind and read your bank statements, so have some proof from a financial institution that you too are pre-qualified and ready to go, because people lie all the time. All right, I'll summarize it this way. The first proper step in the home buying process is to complete a financial pre-qualification process. Pre-qualification helps both the borrower and the cash buyer in that it helps align what the predetermined money will actually buy. That's the first benefit. However, most importantly, it helps the seller know that the buyer is financially qualified in advance of accepting an offer, allowing the buyer to have a competitive advantage during negotiation. All right. Now remember, you can take immediate action to get started in the right direction if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the very near future by going to get our free step-by-step guides at griffincourses.com. Now, that is a comprehensive version of what we talk about in the podcast. So you need that plan right now. You can read through it, be organized, and boom, you'll be all over the steps, right? Also, don't forget, if you like this podcast and the subjects that it covers, you can subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen so that you don't miss out on any insights each time we upload an episode. We also post all of our episodes on our social media channels, so just remember to turn on the notifications for Griffin Realty Group, and you won't miss the reminders. By the way, there are several other Griffins in the country, so just look for my little shield with the gold mythical beast in the middle. We'd also appreciate it if you would share our content with other people that are in this kind of an interesting situation to buy or sell, and they'll get the help they need that way. Now, thanks for listening, but remember this, nobody's coming for you to help you go through this, so take action and get to work on your own plan for buying or selling property, and we'll be here in the next episode to help you think about this the right way through a plan. Remember, griffincourses.com. You can have one right now. See you in the next episode.